Real knowledge, I think, has become too dangerous to transmit. And real knowledge doesn't know what social norms are. You know, I've seen this in terms of certain U.S. policies where people create a policy for reasons that nobody's really understanding. And a short time later, nobody even knows why the policy was created, the real reason to begin with. Do you see this kind of a world?
I think that's actually one of the meaningful dynamics in institutional decay and in civilizational decay, is that a new civilization is formed coming out of a war or after a migration or through a famine or after like some really difficult thing.
Yeah.
And to really be able to build something new took real capacities, what you would call the contact with the unforgiving, right? Like real empirical capacities. And
You've studied my lingo, sir.
A bit.
Yeah.
And I think that's really good lingo because like I can't lie to physics and have it reward me for it, right? Like either I can grow corn or I can't grow corn. Either I can win at a war or I can't, but there's a real situation. And so oftentimes when we go from non-wartime, where the generals are politicians, to wartime, where the politician generals who maybe suck at war start losing battles and we cycle through looking for ones who are good at it, then we get some who are actually good at war. Those difficult situations select for real empirical capacity. But when you don't have those difficult situations, then you're actually selecting for who can do politics best, which means convince everyone of something, whether it's true or not.
Well, this is what I call sharp minds versus sharp elbows.
Yeah. And so you have the people who are at the beginning of figuring out how to do some new civilization. And those people had some capacity to be in direct contact with reality and figure stuff out. And then oftentimes what they pass on is the stuff they figured out, but not the psychology in them and the capacities to figure stuff out. So the generator function of the civilizational model is lost. And so now we start getting copying errors, and people are hopefully trying to at least copy it earnestly. So now we've got a constitution or a set of law or a set of market practices or whatever it is, but we don't really understand how we generated that effective thing. And so that also means that as the environment changes, we won't be able to adapt it adequately. And that also means that we're not going to know how to deal with failures of it. So then some people recognizing that start realizing that they can do better by defecting on the system and kind of preying on it than by participating with the system. And so, and this is what we think of as corruption, right? Where they can start maximizing their own bonus structure or do a back-end deal or whatever. And so long as it's adequately hidden, they can get away with it. And now that collapses the civilization even further. So it goes from loss of generator function to copying errors to incentive for internal defection and disinformation. And, you know, I think that every civilization has faced this, a loss of intergenerational knowledge transfer, because it's not just the knowledge, it's the generator function of how to figure it out.
But it's also the case that real knowledge, I think, has become too dangerous to transmit. And real knowledge doesn't know what social norms are. And you know, certainly the biological world is so disturbing. I mean, there's no corner of the biological world that you can look at and not come away thinking, wow, that's incredibly disturbing. And what we're seeing right now is a situation in which we can't cope with any discussion of biology. Every single attempt to have a real biological discussion, given all of the social issues that it would bring up, immediately ends in madness. I've just seen no ability to talk real biology in public. And so this is the earliest place where I can see here's a subject, a science that actually can't be discussed. I don't have anything in particular in mind. There's just, Bob Triver's work on parent-child conflict. If we have a beautiful story about how mothers would do anything for their children and somebody comes along and says, no, it's actually a struggle where mothers want to hold on to their resources because they're going to have many children, and the child attempts to gain as much resource as possible without regard for the mother. That's so against the Hallmark card version of motherhood for Mother's Day that we can't have a discussion about parent-child conflict in biology. It's not, that one isn't about gender. It's not about race. It's not about, power dynamics. It's about, it just immediately runs into one of our cherished nonsensical points of view.
Or that the market is self-correcting.
The market is always self-correcting and knows best, that the leading thinkers are all sitting in institutional chairs.
That every previous civilization was the Hobbesian bias, brutish, nasty, short, dreadful lives, and that everything is awesome just in the last little bit because of this system. So don't criticize the system too much.
Exactly. So this is the weird thing that I'm finding is that you can't start interesting conversations, not only about the pessimism of the impending collapse if we keep this up, but about the optimism about, well, what might we do differently? Like, we can't get energized to actually use this period of time to do something novel and interesting and hopeful.
Okay, so think about this. The definition of infidel for kind of a jihadist ideology is anybody that's not supporting the jihadist ideology. The definition of witch to the Crusaders was kind of a similar thing, right? I have a friend who went and looked at a bunch of the intelligence agency documents in Yugoslavia and some of the Baltic nations that had been declassified after the USSR collapse, specifically regarding how the intelligence agencies influenced the definition of psychiatry and their equivalent of the DSM. And so there was something like their definition
of the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual for Psychology, which tells you when somebody maybe has a personality disorder or neuroses.
You remember the previous definition of female mania during the Victorian period, right? Which basically translated to she had a sex drive. And so that was like a mental illness. And so their definition of something that translated to schizophrenia, the first symptom had negative feelings about the state. And the second symptoms might take a while to show up. And so what I think happens is that the dominant system ends up eating psychology and saying that the psychology that supports the dominant system is healthy psychology, and anything that is dissenting to it's not healthy. It ends up eating spirituality and virtue and ethics and academia and whatever to basically say the behaviors that support the system are good, so the thinking that supports those behaviors is good, and anything that's dissenting is bad. And it's so easy to see it in the Crusades or in jihadism or even in Victorian time period. It's just very hard for us to see it about ourselves now. But I think that's actually like one of these fundamental things in terms of you're saying like, why don't we have group sense making, is because you have a self-perpetuating system that includes the self-perpetuation of the memes that support the system.